Hey, my beautiful listeners, we are back with season 3 of The Beautiful Side of Grief, and I'm your host, Helen Morris. My incredible guests continue to share their own personal stories of grief in so many different forms, and how they have managed to find the positives and beauty from their experiences. And I hope by listening to these honest, heartfelt accounts, you can find the tips, insights, resources, and strategies you need for where you are right here and now. And maybe one day even find your own beautiful side to your grief. So share away, as I would love this podcast to reach as many who need to hear it as possible. And don't forget to check out the episode notes as well for more information and links. Plus, the energy healing I do that changed my life forever. And this season, I'd love to share the affirmations and meditations I'm working on also, so stay tuned for those. Right now, though, my thanks to you for listening in, and let's check out who this week's guest is. My guest today is definitely an expert in grief firsthand, and not because she is a clinical psychologist, but because she has suffered more grief from the tender age of 4 onwards than many of us could possibly imagine. An older sibling at the age of 4, then, as a young adult, both her mum and her sister, and if that wasn't enough, the slow death of a treasured friend and life partner, later followed by 3 miscarriages, and when she finally did get her treasured son, postpartum depression set in. Yep, that's a bucket load of grief right there. She went from intensely fearing grief to knowing it well in its many different guises. As a clinical psychologist and parent coach, Dr. Melissa Reilly is passionate about helping mums without a mum feel joy in motherhood and move from feelings of isolation, insecurity, and overwhelm to a place of confidence and resilience. And that's what we're going to be talking about. The role of resiliency in grief, how to be a mum without a mum, and why we shouldn't fear death, and who the heck Gladys is. And I'm setting the intention for this show that if you are a mum, and especially a mum without a mum, that you are left with the confidence of knowing that you can do this, and more so through the knowledge and tools that Dr. Melissa will share with us. And we can't start the show without me sending you all a bucket load of love, hope, and happiness your way to help you through whatever it is you're going through right here and right now. So it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the show today, Dr. Melissa Reilly.
Thank you, Helen. It is my pleasure to be here. I am so happy that you've invited me to be part of this amazing show. So thank you.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Now, that intro, that is a whole heap of grief you've experienced. I mean, I knew part of it when I sent you the interview link, though you have experienced it on so many different levels. And it actually was quite difficult to decide what we would cover in this hour together. So let me start by asking you, why do you suppose you got to see grief firsthand in so many forms? Surely you must have asked yourself this.
Oh, absolutely. When I think about the bigger picture and the meaning behind all of this, I think one of the gifts I've been given is the ability to understand the experience of grief in many different forms. And therefore, I can walk through the healing process with many people because, as you know, grief is something we experience throughout life. It isn't something that in 3 weeks we are now over, or in 3 months, or in 3 years, right? And so I have, because of my experiences, the ability to recognize not only an individual grief experience, but how that grief then impacts you at different stages in your own life and at different stages of the life in which you lost as that would have moved through. So, for example, I am now older than my sisters, ever were. And my son is now older than my sister was, but I re-experienced some difficulty when he turned 7, including a lot of fear, because that was the age in which she died. But I also know the compounding experience of death. So when you have multiple deaths, the re-triggering of earlier experiences. So again, I think my own experiences really helped me connect with others and their grief without becoming overwhelmed by that myself. And so I think I am very comfortable with grief now, and therefore can help others through their experience as well, because unfortunately, many people are not comfortable with grief. It is frightening, and sometimes people will shy away from talking about it, which can lead others to feel really isolated. So I feel very blessed to be one of the individuals that anybody can talk to about it, and feel free in doing so, and knowing that I'm not going to shy away from it.
Yes, and I think people are very lucky to have you with all that experience at your disposal, because like you say, grief is still something that is not spoken about. And I think, what we've been going through even the past couple of years, there is so much grief on such a huge scale, and we just need to just be sharing it more and more and understanding the impacts of it. So I'm excited to be getting into that with you, and especially your passion about being a mum without a mum. But before we get into that, I'd like to understand what it felt like for you to lose your older sister at 4 with no one speaking about it, and how that led to your intense fear of grief.
Well, my sister, let's see. So my sister was 2 years older than I. And then I had another sister who was 18 months my junior. And so right after my younger sister was born, she was born premature. So there were some, stressors on my poor parents. But, shortly after her life was stable, my older sister was diagnosed with leukemia. And this was back in the 70s. And so leukemia at that point was pretty much a, far gone conclusion of being terminal. Thankfully, now the survival rate is much higher, but back in the 70s, it wasn't. But despite that, my parents did the best they could with regards to getting her treatment, and the best treatment available. But that led to my younger sister and I being left in the care of others who were able to watch us while my parents were with my older sister getting treatment. We lived in a very rural community in upstate New York in the United States. And the best treatment available was in New York City, which was not far away, 2.5, 3 hours away, but, far enough.
Sure.
So my earliest memories in life, it really include the experience of her treatment, the experience of waking up in places that I didn't go to sleep in, because some emergency would have occurred in the middle of the night. We would just be dropped off with whomever could watch us, because unfortunately my parents' parents didn't live close at that time. And, I remember as a little girl being, visiting my sister in the hospital, and being in New York and looking and seeing the little ant people, because we were high up. So, and I remember being separated from her, and then that was just part of life. And then my parents would come home, she would come home, and things would be okay. And then she'd leave again, and my parents would leave again. And that just became our routine. And so it became a normal routine to then ask, when's Kim coming home? Right? Until one day the answer was, she's not. And that was the day of her funeral. My sister and I didn't go to my older sister's funeral. And I completely understand that. My parents had enough, which unfortunately coincided with Mother's Day weekend. So my dear mother lost her firstborn child right before Mother's Day. I mean, what a horrible experience. And so after the funeral, they picked us up and brought us home. And I have a very vivid memory of asking, when's Kim coming home? And, silence. And then my mom's whispered voice saying she's not, she died. Now, 4-year-old doesn't really understand that. And I remember distinctly having in my head this thought that, oh, well, that's really sad. I don't know what to do, but I really just want to keep playing with my little sister, but I know I shouldn't because mom and dad are weird right now. And again, just having this weird feeling like, okay, something's not right, but I really just want to start playing again, but I know I shouldn't. And so after that, my parents did the best they could with trying to make our lives normal. My younger sister turned 3 just a few days after the funeral. And again, God bless her, my mother still had a birthday party. She had just buried her her first child, and she had a birthday party because she was not going to let anything disrupt our lives. So she just kind of barreled ahead. I started kindergarten, later that year, even though I was, still not 5 yet, but she was determined that nothing was going to disrupt our lives. She had the best intentions. But it was really painful for both her and my father. And one of the ways they coped was to just continue to live life as if nothing happened. And we learned very quickly that we just didn't talk about it because it was just too painful for my parents. So they never talked about it. And life literally went on as if nothing happened. So I didn't really realize the impact that had on me until much later in life. In my young 20s, when my first grandparent became ill. So we were very blessed. All 4 of my grandparents lived until my early 20s, and we were quite close with them. After my sister had died at various times, they had moved close to where we lived. So they were a big part of my life. And my mother was an only child, so it was just us. And then my dad had a sister, 15 years his junior. So she was much closer in age to me than him. So we were very, very close. And so all holidays revolved around us. So it was just a very tight-knit, small group of individuals. So when my grandfather started having heart attacks and his health was declining significantly, I was home from graduate school, and me and my younger sister were talking about it. And she had made the comment that she didn't feel like she could survive if our grandfather died. And I was like, yeah, me too. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so we both had that feeling. And I had mentioned it to a therapist I had been seeing at the time while in graduate school, another psychologist, as just, part of the therapy. Yeah, we don't know how we're going to survive this. And she paused. She's like, oh, hold on. What do you mean by that? I'm like, well, yeah, my grandfather dying, like that's going to be traumatic. And she was like, well, wow, that's really significant. So a man dying at the end of his natural life, you feel like you can't survive. And all of a sudden I realized, wow, maybe that is strange. And so it was through that interaction that we were able to kind of piece together the fact that never having talked about it created this idea that death was something that was so terrible that you couldn't even talk about it.
Yeah.
So that the mere mention of it would destroy you. And so that was the unintended result of my parents' good intention of trying to make our life as normal as possible. That it created this sense of grief being terrible. And Helen, I have to be honest, I am so thankful that I had that discovery, that was my experience of death before the other deaths occurred in my life, so that I could start kind of learning that death wasn't something that would destroy me before I had the next set of deaths. And what was
yes, because they were pretty major.
Yeah, absolutely. And, my aunt and I, have talked, and she had a very similar experience that she, like, life just went on. They never talked about it. My grandparents, her parents never talked about it. And so she had that same feeling. So it was really just a shared phenomenon among all of us, because she was a child too when she died.
I think that was very much a sign of the times back then too, that people didn't talk about their feelings, that they did just get on with it. And there are many, many people. I came across a very, very lovely friend of the family after my daughter died, and he started talking about his brother dying and his family not ever talking about it and how that impacted him. And that was like he's late 50s, early 60s maybe. And yes, it had been all those years that he just never talked about it. And so being firsthand with my daughter really sort of started opening up stuff for him as well. How did it affect you physically, do you think? Because you suppress these feelings. You talked about waking up in a strange bed in a place that you didn't go to sleep in, and then knowing that you wanted to be happy but couldn't be happy. You talk about those things. And I think when you just keep stuffing them down, going, okay, well, we can't be like that. We can't be happy today because, we just know we can't be. How does that have an impact on you physically?
Oh, it had quite a dramatic effect on me physically. I was a child who was constantly having some kind of pain or ache or problem. So I remember my legs always hurting. I would go on sleepovers once I got a little older and bring my heating pad because I knew I would have some kind of ache or pain, right? I mean, what child travels with a heating pad, At the age of 13, I was on angina medicine for chronic headaches, just because that's how I experienced that emotion. And my little sister, part of the teasing in our family was she was the hypochondriac because something always hurt. Well, she was nonverbal when all of this was going on. So the only way she knew to get soothed and comfort was if something medically was wrong, right? So,
yes.
So I experienced it through physical symptoms, and it wasn't in my head. I wasn't making it up. It was absolutely real. I had all these, stress hormones going on, and the only way I knew to make sense of them was through pain.
Yes, I think we're understanding more so now in this day and age just how everything is interconnected, how our emotions affect our physical body and how we think affects our emotions, that affects our physical body, and how that's all interwoven now. Yeah. So there's many people walking around with very legitimate pain processes that they've been to many, many doctors who say, well, no, all the tests are fine. Maybe you should just get on with it, or we don't know what's happening. There are many, many people that have not connected their pain to what they've perhaps experienced. I think something that really resonated with me in your bio was being a mum without a mum, or mom, as you say it. We say mum with a U. So you'll hear that right throughout and go, gee, that sounds weird. But that's... So my own mum died at the age of, I was 23, and she never got to see my girl. But I was lucky in that I had a really incredible support person in my stepmom. And we spoke briefly about this before we went on in. Yeah. But, that was still fraught with feelings of not having my own biological mother experiencing anything that I went through as a parent. And I know that when you finally got your gorgeous wee son, you were plunged into a darkness that is postnatal depression or postpartum depression, whichever way you know it by. Talk us through how you recognized that that came from your unresolved grief.
Well, I began to piece it together the when it wasn't fitting what other people were describing as postpartum depression. Like my recurring memories and thoughts of mom and feeling alone and isolated, those are all common aspects, right, of postpartum depression. But it kept churning up those earlier experiences of grief, not being enough, not having enough, feeling that I was doing something wrong, that maybe I could fix it if I was good enough. Because growing up with a grieving mom, that was kind of the role I took on, right? If I was really super good and perfect, right, that would make life a little bit easier for her. Not that she ever, put that on me. I put that on myself because I was empathic and could sense she was, a grieving, depressed mom, right? So, that's a common phenomenon when you have a grieving parent, that the children will then, try and compensate for that. So all of those kinds of compensatory experiences on my part were cropping up again in ways that hadn't happened for me in many years. That sense of needing to make sure that everybody around me felt okay, and always trying to kind of connect and see, is everybody around me comfortable? And that wasn't just my son. It was like everybody, but to the nth degree. And I had enough self-awareness because of, the own work I had done psychologically for myself, but also, professionally, kind of knowing these processes, that increased need to take care of others and make sure that I was making them more comfortable. I knew enough to know that that was part of my underlying grief process.
That is such a good point you raised there, because typically just what you described does not sound like depression, does it? That need to make sure everybody else is okay and things like that. And I think that's a very, very good thing to highlight, so others out there who may be feeling the same thing can recognize that that is not a normal process. That's not part of the normal nurturing process of being a new mum.
Right.
So, and I don't mean to laugh it off, but it's like, I think it's good to talk about this and understand this, because postpartum depression, I dealt with it on the periphery in one of my health positions. And I just feel that these mums plunged into this world that is like nothing they could ever imagine. They don't know how to navigate it. They don't know why they're feeling like they're feeling. They don't know how to express what they're feeling. They've got a baby that needs their attention, and they just don't have the capacity to give themselves, let alone anybody else, what they need. And, again, we're just not talking about this, are we?
No, absolutely not. And, a grieving mom can also experience postpartum depression, right? They aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but the grief itself can be contributing to it. And if we aren't recognizing the grief, right, then simply staying at the surface level of symptoms isn't going to work, right? So just addressing, the sadness and skill building and support, right, without kind of recognizing what's driving it underneath, it just isn't enough. It wasn't enough for me.
No. So the research is unclear on why around 12% of mothers experience postpartum or postnatal depression. So they're attributing it to genetics and environmental factors, emotional and physical influences, or a combination of the emotional, physical, and psychological health issues. Do you have any stats on how much more likely motherless mums are likely to experience postpartum depression? Because it's all pretty vague.
Right. I don't have those stats because I have not been able to find any research on it. And in the practice that I do, I provide treatment. I'm not a researcher, but my goodness, I would love to connect. If there are any psychologists out there that do research as part of what they do, I would love to connect on a research study looking specifically at the prevalence rates and the differences, because I absolutely believe that it's quite significant, but there just isn't research done yet.
Yeah. And I believe, that's what I was looking for. I was Googling, and honestly, it's the whole arena is so wishy-washy around postpartum depression. It's so vague. I mean, anybody could probably put their hand up at some of the markers they're saying. So that's how not understood this field, this arena is. But, I believe what you're saying, and why you have a passion for supporting motherless mums is because of the impact of that, and especially once you give birth. So you yourself felt this when you had your son. And, one of the things is that when you have a newborn baby or a young baby, they are with you all the time, unless you've got a very, very good support network. But if you're isolated with this child with you 24/7, how do you get yourself some coping mechanisms to deal with giving yourself what you need, in addition to giving your baby what they need and those around you what they need? How do you find those strategies, and what did you do? Give us a rundown on what worked for you.
That's a great question, because especially now in pop culture, there's such a focus on me time, right? Take time for yourself, and which is great, when you're able to, and I support that. But the reality is, for lots of us moms, particularly those mothers without a mother, right? We don't have that go-to person that we can simply call up and say, hey, I need to take a break for an hour, come over and help me out. We may or may not have other people in our life that can do that, but often we rely on our mom for that kind of role. So I discovered quite quickly that I needed to figure out ways to care for myself that did not require me stepping away from my son. Now, my son, it was a very complicated, high risk and fragile pregnancy. I went into preterm labor with him at 26 weeks and then was on bed rest and hospitalized and all kinds of things. So, when I went into labor, I was told I had about a 10% chance of carrying him to term because of where I was, all of the measurements and everything that was going on and the blood work and everything. But, by the grace of God, I was able to carry him until exactly 37 weeks. So we made it. But unfortunately, some of the preventative measures, some of the shots I was given to stop labor repeatedly, likely contributed to some neurological differences that my son has. So he was difficult to soothe. He had some difficulty kind of self-regulating. So my little guy needed to be constantly connected with me, which was wonderful. I had no problem staying as connected with him as he needed. So I found ways to care for myself while having him with me. I did not need to step away. And those included my absolute go-to thing that I needed was a wrap. I used the Moby wrap. And so that kid was wrapped on, like I wore him constantly so that I could function and he was soothed and taken care of. And so I would go for my walks. I would do things that helped me feel good. I was continuously rocking, which soothed him, but also soothed me. I also used a lot of guided imagery and meditation with him, right? So he was listening along with me listening.
Yes.
And audiobooks. So there was that constant language that he was hearing as well as me. And so I was doing things that I knew comforted me. When I would take a bath, he would be in the bath with me. And so I was enjoying the bath. So
not rushing through it thinking I've got to get back to my son.
Exactly.
Yes.
And most of those baths weren't about bathing. They were just about being in the warm water. Right. So it wasn't a chore. It was, so, I think each mom finding ways to adapt what they find replenishing in ways that they can do with their child. And so I brought him everywhere unapologetically. I never asked for permission. I made it so that if somebody would then need to tell me that my son needed to separate from me, I wasn't going to offer that as a solution. So he just came along with me because I am a very firm believer that is nobody has the right to separate a child from their baby. I mean, a mom from their baby. So
did you have many people passing criticism or judgment on how you chose to parent that worked for you?
Well, I had, the questions every now and then about, or the comments, you're spoiling him, which again is like nails down a chalkboard for me, because you don't spoil a newborn by being connected. But again, it's not my job to educate others when they're not asking me to. So, so, okay, yep, this is what I'm choosing to do. And right. And I did there were people in my life that supported and understood and respected the choices that I made, even if they were different from the choices that they would have made. So that helped.
You are walking in these shoes, nobody else. So you've got to do what's best for you, as you know how.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, that connection was important for both of us.
For most of us, there is a Gladys, a Sally, a Freda, or whatever you want to call that insidious guilt we suffer, especially as parents, and that infrequently intrudes to make us doubt ourselves and our parenting skills, especially. I know that was a frequent companion for me when I was parenting. So how do we deal with the guilt and the doubts?
I love that question. So I call my guilt Gladys. That's who Gladys is. She's my guilt.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
think that's who Gladys is.
Yep, absolutely. I do not, Gladys comes with me everywhere, but I do not let Gladys drive the car. She's got to sit in the back seat. She doesn't make the decisions. Now, guilt, like all emotions, has a purpose, right? We as human beings have emotions so that we can interact appropriately within communities, in social environments. So we need emotion. Guilt is no different. Guilt is simply an emotion, just like love is an emotion, sadness is an emotion, happiness is an emotion. So the purpose of guilt is simply to create a pause so that when we are doing new behaviors, when we are going outside of our comfort zone, that pause gives us the opportunity to evaluate whether what we're doing is good for us and those around us or not good for those ourselves and those around us. So having guilt itself is not an indicator of right or wrong. And I will repeat that. Guilt is not an indicator of right or wrong.
That's a good distinction.
It's simply a pause button so that we can look at, is what I'm doing helpful for me and others or not helpful? So whenever you are engaging in something that's new for you or is outside of your comfort zone, guilt is going to get triggered. So if you are an individual who tends to be very other oriented and other focused, when you start setting a limit, and that's going to trigger your guilt, but that doesn't mean that setting that limit is unhelpful or unhealthy or harmful. It just means you're not accustomed to doing it and it feels uncomfortable. So you never have to fear that emotion of guilt. It's just an emotion. Recognize it. Take ownership of it. But do not let guilt decide for you what you do or you don't do.
We often carry around guilt like it's this huge burden with us, and it intrudes in so many different areas of our life. So I love that explanation that you've just given. That is so on point. Yes, yes, yes. So now let's look at the role of resiliency and why that is so important.
Helen, the first step in resiliency is hardship. You cannot achieve resiliency if you have not gone through something difficult in your life. Once you've experienced something difficult and you have persevered and gone past it and still going and moving, then you can reach resilience. So the way that I define resilience is it's the ability to meet a challenge with the resources that you have or by obtaining additional resources, and then developing confidence as you meet additional challenges along the way. So, for example, when something difficult in my life occurs, so, I don't know, some conflict or something, right? Just as a, silly example occurs, and I'm avoid conflict. I don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable, right? But I don't need to shy away from it. I know that discomfort is temporary and I can handle it. The emotion, the discomfort, it's not going to derail me. It's not going to, get in the way of me being successful. So I can face it. I can feel all the yucky feelings, and then I will keep going. And so it doesn't get in my way. I learn from it. I adapt. I get stronger, and I keep going, and it builds my confidence, right? So the act of experiencing a hardship itself doesn't create resilience, but you can't have resilience if you've never gone through anything. And thankfully, most of us in life go through things. So I think it's a rare individual that gets through any part of life without some type of hardship. So when we face that hardship, when we experience something really difficult, we need to recognize again and learn and develop that we have resources. We can learn other resources, other skills. We can meet that challenge. And then we can recognize, and this is the piece that's so important, that we overcame that hurdle.
Yes.
And that we did that.
Yes.
It wasn't luck. It wasn't given to us. We had some utility in that. We did that,
Yeah.
right? And therefore we can continue to do that sort of thing. So there have been a lot of hardships in my life, and it's unfortunate that they occurred, but honestly, Helen, I wouldn't undo them because they are part of what makes me who I am now.
Exactly. I so agree with that statement 100%, because again, I've just had bucket loads as well. And I love now that I've had so many different experiences that I can empathize with people on so many different levels, when they're going through stuff, and see it from a different perspective. And I feel that that's what I've been all those challenges have led me to is this greater understanding and compassion and love, for when people don't get it right and when things go wrong in life. And, as it happens in so many different areas, I love the idea that we can embrace our imperfections now, because I think there was so much emphasis on us being perfect individuals. And, that's such an impossible task to achieve or state to achieve. It's an unrealistic state, and it's fraught with, lots of danger along the way, I think, for people trying to be, perfect in everything they do. I love being imperfect, and I embrace that now, and that's something that's taken me years to do. So I love that you're talking about this now.
Oh, I was going to say, and it really helps as a mom, of a child who I know is experiencing hardship, right? My son has special needs and his life is difficult. There are things that he has to go through and experiences that other children don't. And as a mom, that makes me feel sad for him, right? And I wish that wasn't the case. But I know, right, that he is developing the skills and the tools to be a extremely resilient individual, right? And so for those moms, when you are struggling and you have this big fear that you're causing, hardship for your children, right? Minimize that, absolutely. But also know that your child has the ability to be strong and grow and be okay, even when they've gone through difficult things.
Yes. And that they don't need to be like everybody else. They just need to be confident in who they are, exactly as they are, with, a toolbox. Because I love that. We don't actually have to have the tools. We just need to know where to find the tools that we can use for the situations we come across. So your passion is now supporting mums without a mum. And as a clinical psychologist, parent coach, and someone who knows what this is like firsthand, what are some of the key things that a new mum, without that crucial support system in place, need to know, especially if they're feeling stressed, unable to cope, desperate, they have a crying baby that never seems to stop crying?
Well, first and foremost, I want them to know that they are not alone, that there are others of us out there, and what they're experiencing is real and it's difficult, and that they have gone through some difficult things already in their life, and that they can do this too. And that I encourage them to reach out to other family members they may have, to reach out to friends, to reach out to professionals, right? To therapists, counselors, psychologists, or other, coaches out there, because it is so important to create and build a community. And for those of us, particularly those moms without a mom, I think it becomes really important to build a community of several people. So the role that a mother would fill in your life is likely going to require multiple people to do that. So you would have, for example, a wise woman, right? That woman that you can ask lots of questions about parenting, and she'll know the answers. All right. And then you'll have this other, friend that you can call and just cry and just lean on, and she'll just listen. She won't give advice. She'll just listen, right? And then there's another person that, may or may not be a good listener, but boy, she will come and grab your 6 loads of laundry, wash it, fold it, and bring it back, right? So it's unrealistic to expect that there's one person that's going to fill all of these needs, but it isn't unrealistic to expect that you can have all of those needs met by different people. You just need to recognize the people in your life, what their gifts are and what they're good at, and then go ahead and use that, right? Reach out, support. And if
Sorry, such good advice.
yes, yes, yes. And I know for me, one of the things that got in my way was just worrying that I was a burden to other people. Like helping me is a burden. I mean, isn't that silly that we think that, right? But think about it. If you know 4 people in your life and you ask them to help you for 1 hour once a month, I mean, once a month. I mean, come on. I don't care how busy you are. Most of us can say, I can give up 1 hour once a month of my life to help a friend. So if you have 4 people, guess what? You've got an hour of help every week, which makes a huge difference. And again, 1 hour a month on any one person isn't a burden.
And what about letting go some of the things that we think we have to be as parents, like having this tidy house or, making sure that the kids have this and this, and it's extra burdens on ourselves, because I know that sometimes feeling like we have to live up to other people's expectations when we're barely able to get ourselves out of bed in the morning is a huge ask and an unrealistic ask. And I think we have to stop letting other people's judgments or expectations encroach on how we need to be as a mum. What are your thoughts around that?
I agree completely. I'm a firm believer that, all moms do the best that they can with what they have at the time, right? Yes. So even when we've had, negative or difficult experiences with our mothers from, our own childhood, they did the best they could with what they had at the time. That doesn't mean their best was good enough necessarily, right? But we all do the best that we can. And so we need to be compassionate and patient and kind and give ourselves permission to ask not only for assistance, but support so that we can give those limited resources we have to the things that are actually important to us. Because time, energy, and resources are all finite. We cannot add more to it. We just change how we divide it. So it's so important that we are putting the majority of our time, energy, time, resources on those things that are most important. Because if we're putting our energy onto those things that really aren't important, that means we're neglecting the things that are, and that tends to be our children and other loved ones.
And you know what? Our kids don't notice if the dishes aren't done or the washing isn't folded by a certain time. They don't give 2 hoots about that. They like that you take the moment and roll around on the floor with them and make stupid noises and all those sorts of things. That's what they really want. If somebody is isolated, and that makes them less probably likely or able to communicate freely what they're feeling, if they're in that position where they don't have that good support system around it. What do you recommend? Like, do you recommend reaching out to an online support group to start that ball rolling or something so that you can just share your thoughts without judgment or with like-minded people?
Absolutely. I think today one of the benefits of social media is the ability to connect. And there are, for example, on Instagram, there's hashtags for, moms without a mom, motherless mothers, and things like that. And I know, I've been trying to reach out in those types of communities just to start finding and feeling those connections and reaching out. And, your listeners are absolutely welcome to reach out to me in that way. So, reaching out, like I was saying earlier, to a professional, ask those, reach out. Hey, I would love to be able to talk about my grief story, my struggles as a mom without a mom, and explore that with a neutral person, I think can be really helpful.
How can we get people talking more about this?
To talk, I think exactly what we're doing, right? spreading the word, letting
Just
people
what we're
know
doing
that this
now.
is a real thing, and to start even just naming it, to identify it. Right. I am, proudly describing myself now as a mom without a mom.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because when I say that, people look at me a little bit, and I've had so many people then say to me, I'm a mom without a mom too. Right. Like, oh, okay, good. Well, welcome. Right. It's the club none of us wanted to join.
Yeah. Yes. And unless you start asking, unless you start talking, you're not going to discover those other people. And there are many, many people out there like us, Yeah.
Right. Because if we don't identify it, it just leads to those feelings of shame, right? The
Oh
sense of,
gosh,
what
yes.
is wrong with me? Why am I different? Well, the reality is we're different.
Yeah.
We don't have a mom. It is different. It just is, right? So, and there are different ways people don't have a mom, right? Some don't have a mom because their mother died, like myself. Others don't have a mom because they're estranged, right? And they've had to make those difficult decisions to disconnect. And some don't have their mom because they live in very different places. And all three of those situations can lead to the same feeling of isolated, overwhelmed, and insecure.
Yes. And there is that grief that people don't recognize, just that distance or, away from somebody has its own grief. And we think somebody has to die for there to be grief. But no, it doesn't. And that's what I'm hoping to have people understand, that when we look at grief from all the different perspectives, we actually have loads of grief in our life that often we don't recognize. And once we do start recognizing it, we go, okay, so that's why I feel like this. And that's why I don't want to do that. And that's why. And it's just making those connections. And I think is so important. We could keep talking, I tell you, but I think I've used up all our time. But, what I never leave my interviews without asking some key important questions like, what is the best thing that has happened to you today?
Oh goodness, the best thing that's happened to me today, I would say, it's this interview. I mean, I've really enjoyed it because it's a topic near and dear to my heart. And if there's one person listening to this right now that feels, a sense of hope and feels like they are good, but what we've said, then, everything is worth it. So, this is.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful.
The other good thing would be just, my son, walking out the front door today saying, Mom, can I, leave my jacket at home today? Yes, you can. The sun is shining and it's above 50 degrees. Go right ahead. So that was good too.
Yes, as we start heading into winter, yes.
Yeah.
No, but that's a beautiful feeling, isn't it? What is your proudest moment to date?
To date, I would have to say it, is when my son looks at me, and I get teary just thinking about it, and says to me, Mom, thank you for being my mom. He's such a sensitive little boy. And he says that, Mom, thank you for being my mom. So I just feel like
it's making me tear up.
Yeah. I'm doing something right.
It's the little things in life. Take those moments. They are more than all the big things that we think we need.
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
Yeah. So when your day, or you have moments in your day that are not going well, what is a really good go-to that you use to pivot yourself out of it?
Taking a slow breath, reminding myself that in this moment, I am safe and I am loved, and that no matter what, life will keep going. And that just helps me through it. Anything.
Yes, that's beautiful. Let's keep it simple. Yeah. What would you like to leave our listeners with? What are your takeaways?
Well, I want your listeners to know that they are not alone, and that I want them to seek out their mom community, that their grief is real, and that it is really okay to express that, to share their stories, the happy and the difficult, and that sometimes it can be tough figuring out who we are as a mom. And that's a normal part of being a mom without a mom. So it's all right if you're not sure, how you're supposed to be. You're figuring it out. It's all right. Be patient.
And you've got a free guide to help
I do.
mums care for themselves as they care for their baby, don't you? So how can our listeners access that?
So I have two, actually. I've got one specifically for moms with, it's care for yourself as you care for your baby. And you will have in the show notes, I believe, so they can download that.
Yes, I will, definitely.
And that's got 6 strategies to care for themselves without needing to step away from their babies. So the ones that myself and tips and how I use them. And then the other guide, which is brand new, I made for moms of all ages, because I know some of your listeners are going to be out of that, is Enjoy Being a Mom Again quick guide. So that is for moms that recognize that they get distracted longing for their own mom and feel that it's taking them away from enjoying being a mom. It helps them to bring their awareness back to where they want it to be. And that's on their kids and what they're doing, so that they can enjoy that. So those are the 2 things that are free for your listeners. And I will make sure you have both of those.
Fantastic. I love that. I love being able to, direct people to links where they can pick up this valuable information, because you listen and you think you'll always remember it. But hey, if anybody's like me, it just goes in one ear and out the other, and I get a small bit left in between. So, Dr. Melissa Reilly, I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to connect with me today and just share this beautiful information that you've shared about it totally being okay to be a mum in whatever form that takes for you. And especially if you're a mum without your own mum to help guide the way, that there are ways that you can be supported and you can get through this, and that you are totally okay to feel how you're feeling missing your mum. And lots of good information in between that just helps us in our day-to-day life of being a parent. So thank you so, so much.
It was my pleasure, Helen. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got some real value from this episode. Let me know how I'm doing, or if there's a topic you'd like covered, by clicking on the Healing to Be You Gmail link, or going to the Healing to Be You website. To get notified of new episodes, hit the subscribe button, and please share if you know of someone who could benefit from this episode. Until next time, be kind to you and take good care.